So I'm before the camera. That's fine. I'm Jim Shepard. I'm a programmer, been AAA for 8 years, indie for the last 3, and I'm here to give you a slower and worse version of Brett's talk. It is bad. So yeah, what's up? The procedural battlefield. Okay, this is the got to be all about battles and strength because I made Dungeonmans and that's about battles and strength. So I'm going to see everybody do this. Please, I'm gonna walk, man. It's cool. Please raise your hand if at some point in your life you grabbed a friend by the shoulders and said, I have an awesome idea for a roguelike. Anybody? Did this ever happen? 1, 2? Okay, yeah, everybody. And I'll tell you, I have an awesome idea for a roguelike. Oh my God. This one's gonna be so good. You don't understand, you're a bear. You are a bear. So this happens to a lot of us. We come up with really cool ideas for roguelikes, right? Most of us are programmers, so we have these systems in mind. And it's like, oh great, I'm gonna model spleen damage, both spleens, and just all sorts of stuff that we really dig because we're crunchy programmers and we love that nerdy shit, and then we do this. Right? Why? Why do we do this? Why do we do this? And so, well, it's procedural, right? I mean, it's a roguelike, it's procedural, so I made the procedural. No, the procedural battlefield is a lie. It's a bullshit story. And we can't rely on that anymore. It doesn't make your game fun. We have to do something else. We have done a few other things. We've seen here Your Talk and Your Talk combined have come up with these ideas. I'm just going to retread them in another fashion, but I have an additional insight that may be useful. So the true battlefield, right, uses one, some, or all of these systems. You have your hand-built, handcrafted experiences. You have your cool procedural dungeon, because we love to make those. And then you have emergent level design, and that's something that is kind of finicky, but I think it plays a part, and I'll show you some examples of current modern games that do use that to make cool stuff. Let's cover these real quick. What are we going to do here? Today you're going to learn, right? We're doing this because it supports our cool game systems. We can guide our players to do fun stuff, and we can control the theme. All right, the reason, the stuff you're going to learn here are just some techniques to be iterative, to do it yourself, things you can take home if you want to go. No actual code, but pseudocode and development for how you can build these yourselves, and why we're doing this, I'll get to at the end. All right, so hand-built areas, right? Number one thing, this is something that we've done in lots of games. You can see what I got here. There's a Doom arena, there's a town from some game, I don't know, and then there's fellas, and then there's it must be Dwarf Fortress, right? And then there's a temple up there from Dungeonmans. These are all static places. The same places. You see them the same every time when you go in. And so, that's cool. There's pros and cons for sure. The one thing is that they're familiar and comforting. A player knows when he gets to an arena, he knows that arena. So, oh man, this is going to be great. When people have these hand-built areas, they definitely form a shared experience. Somebody can say, oh man, I went through the barracks and I used like the double nail gun, and someone else is like, oh man, I went through the same barracks and I took the north path and I had a sword tied to my butt, and everybody's got these different things they can do. And that comes from static hand-built areas. We get a shared experience. The other thing that's really important is we have direct control over the theme. When we hand-build an area, we say it's a barracks, we say it's a ruined temple, we say it's a shopping mall, and it looks like what we want it to look like. Great. Now, the bad parts, the cons, are that players quickly optimize this. When you have the same town at the start of the same game every time, it's basically a straight line. Players run from point to point to point, they know exactly what to do, and they're on their way. We lose the excitement that roguelikes are supposed to bring. Of like, oh, hey, it's a cool random new area. Well, we sacrifice that a bit when we use hand-built areas. Fine. Next up is procedural, right? Oh boy, procedural dungeon making. This is the best stuff. Now, it's so cool because I've been up for 48 hours, and this code's going to make the best dungeon ever, and great. Okay, we love it, right? It's different every time. We know that's not really true. Just because a room has a hallway coming out of the north side into the south side, it's not really, but it's different every time. The player's always surprised. Okay, well, you can kind of bank on that. You do get a great return on variety for the time you spend. You write an algorithm once, fiddle with it once a week, and you get something really cool that generates lots of stuff. And also, it's just fun to write these programs, right? We love this. We love this. This is the stuff you do. This is like, oh man, it's winter break, and I don't want to go home because my parents suck, and I'm stuck in this dorm room. I know, and you code this system that makes islands out of nothing and elephants migrate, and it's awesome, and we love procedural generation. Great. The problem with this, it can be very samey and boring. rooms and hallways, orcs, 20-foot rooms, pies, all that stuff. These generic areas don't promote interesting play. I know it's a new concept we haven't covered yet today. I'm going to bring that to you live. These areas don't necessarily promote interesting play. Open spaces and the conga line of death, which is a long hallway that fills with monsters, and you stand at one end with your big-ass sword and just crush them as they run by. You know, that is comfort food for roguelike players, right? You need to have it sometimes. But if it's the primary method of getting things done, you're missing out. So the last thing here of the trio is Emergent Environments. So here are some games. We've got Spraguewood, Necrodancer, and Dungeonmans that have enemies that create conditions live. And these conditions change where you have to move, where you want to move, where you can't move. And so those are things we could do if we built the levels ourselves, or if the procedural generation put barrels somewhere, but instead, these enemies do it for us. So you've got, in Spraguewood, there's all these slimes, and who the hell knows what a slime does when you kill it in that game? It leaves puddles that make more slimes, or explosions that hurt you. There's the spiders that blow up in poison clouds 2 rounds after you hit them, a whole bunch of stuff that you've got to keep track of when you're doing this, and that's all designed by the monsters. The Spraguewood dungeons are like 4 rooms and 4 hallways, right? And you say, well, Jim, you just said that was boring. Yeah, sure, but the enemies make it cool. And that's emergent level design. Necrodancer is bullshit from Area 3 on. It's just this monsters everywhere. Dragons hop around, the big snow golems that puff around them. There's mushrooms. There's like genies that leave fire trails and ice trails. You look at an area, and 16 beats later, it's entirely different. And what's neat about all this, the players get to say, I am going to solve this room my way. They say, well, the fire guy is dangerous. I don't have to worry about the snowman right now. I got all these things I can do. That player agency is fun. They like it. It is definitely the least samey design because these monsters come out of nowhere. They do all sorts of different stuff, and the players learn to dance. Literally a Necrodancer, but other times it's about, I need to be here, and then jump there, and then shoot at that guy, and it's fun. It's fun to solve those puzzles in our head, little micro things. We talk about gameplay loops, and what are you doing every 60 seconds, what are you doing every 5 minutes, and so on. These are the crunchy little things players like. The bad parts, it's way random. And things can go completely off the chain here if one too many monsters that have, train-style charge attacks or giant explosions show up. It can vary from extremely wild to extremely boring if there's not enough monsters. And sometimes your players groan. When they see the monsters, they're like, oh, God, these guys turned the whole room into peanut butter. Like, what? Again. And they look and they want to just get out the back door. Or they use a wand to cut through the wall. Or they basically take your encounter and say, screw you, I don't want to do it. That's cool, because it's a roguelike and we can do that. But at the same time, you want players to see the things you made and say, this is going to be pretty fun. I'm getting in there. Put on boots, wade in there, and kick monster asses. So, great, okay? We've got these 3 ideas. We've got the hand-built areas, the procedural areas, and the emergent gameplay. Well, that word is a little academic for me, but it's true, right? It's emergent gameplay that comes from monsters. So what is the reason to do this here? So we've talked about mechanics, and that comes from teaching. You can build areas that teach the player how to play the game. You can build areas that set the mood, and you can build areas that inspire. That's a weird one. Right? That's the weird. Inspire is weird, but we'll get to that. Teaching is simple. I'm going to use Dungeonmans as an example. Everybody should have a puppy cave in their game, right? We got to have a puppy cave. That comes from Adam, but the idea is like, there's a room right outside Startington Flats where I can go walk in and kick monsters around and figure out how the game works. Many games have this, if you haven't overrolled at all. In Dungeonmans, the puppy cave helps teach you how to play the game. There's some key elements. For instance, I'll intentionally put loot, as you can see on the top left, in spaces that require diagonal movement to get to. Because players will walk around with the arrow keys or try to use WASD, and they don't understand they can move diagonally. And it's told in the help file, and people should just know. But, people say, well, how the hell do I get that scroll? And so they try 2 times to move in there, they close the game, open an email for support, and say, right, loot spawn in the wall. No, this helps people find out that they can move diagonally. I've seen it happen all the time on Twitch, and it's pretty cool. The other thing that I do in the puppy cave, which is called the convenient Scrollbolt Warren, because it's very convenient. They're right next door to the academy. There are no hallways in the starter dungeon. The tutorial dungeon is a lot of wide open spaces. Players need to realize, in Dungeonmans, you need to use your combat powers that involve movement. You can can jump away and fire an arrow mid-flip. You can shield dash across the room. You can do all sorts of stuff that is more than just find a safe spot and turtle and kill the monsters one at a time. And that's fun. Again, comfort food, which means when players do find that hallway, they're like, oh, awesome. They kite everything they can get their hands on over there, chew them up and laugh the whole time because they feel like they really got one over on the game. And that's a gift. That's a gift you guys can give to your players. Set the mood, right? This is kind of important. I used Dwarf Fortress as an example because it does it so well. When we work in ASCII, right, if that's our canvas, we have a number of ways of making the world deep and interesting, and the primary one is flavor text. Flavor text can be really good. There's some old line I heard about mollusks and antelopes and so on. It's really cool though, right? That's really something. But what happens if you go to an ancient mollusk fortress, right? I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but we can build areas that are cramped or that are wide. You know, why are all the hallways, three tiles wide in this whole dungeon? You find out when you get to the 4th floor and there's hill giant skeletons. Like, oh, cool, like this whole place was a giant temple. But why are there catacombs? Why are there open spaces? Why does it rain here? We can describe that with flavor text. And that's good. But we can also show the player and let them walk around and figure it out at their own pace. So I think the hand-built areas in particular help us set the mood. Procedurally, you can do it as well, as long as you nudge and fiddle with your procedural design to meet that. And then emergent gameplay can work if you say, well, I'm entering this dungeon, it's nothing but craters and giant holes in the wall, and then the bomb monsters show up. The dudes from Serious Sam screaming with bombs, or things that like to explode, like that all just makes sense. You give the player a hint, hey, here's what's coming. The typical one is the Medusa. These are awesome statues. Man, the detail, like, yeah, all right, that guy looks so surprised. Like, yeah, that you see those when you walk through a dungeon and then you turn the corner and steaks, and now you're a stone sad person, right? That's one of the hints we do. We can use level design to deliver that same concept. All right, and inspire. What the hell, inspire greatness? Everybody knows the feeling of kicking down a door and saying, oh, shit, this is a monster zoo, a monster closet, a super awesome monster party in the case of Dungeonmans. You're in real trouble. Or you knew it was coming the whole time and you relish, you've been licking your lips with every tile on the way there because you know you're going to step up and stomp monsters down. When we build places specifically to say, here you go, your nuts are on the anvil, do or die, that is cool. Now, well, hold on, Jim. The whole game is do or die. It's permadeath, and it's a roguelike, and you're supposed to die and have fun and lose. That's true. But if we really are telling a story, a ludo-narrative story, where the player is setting up their business and telling the tale of the great hero she made, and oh man, she's so strong, and she uses 4 pole arms, I don't know how, and it's the best, and these are high points in the story. These are the things they tweet about. If you're interested in getting a community together, they love bragging. Oh man, I went into that arena and I stomped everything so dead 4 times, blah, blah, blah. Or, I went to that arena and I was so stupid, I had no idea. Either way, you've inspired them. They're gonna come back, they're gonna try again, and they're gonna do their best. And that's something we want our players to enjoy. All right, so I'm a little partial to this game called Dungeonmans. I'm gonna talk about the way I did some stuff to help create these experiences. Again, handcrafted fighting areas arranged procedurally with some battlefield-changing foes. Here's my first tip. Don't make an editor. Don't make an editor. You should not make an editor. I would recommend you use text files. And you had pointed out Excel spreadsheets too. That's cool. But you need Excel then to change your data. And the text files are just nature's most perfect fruit, right? I mean, they're just anything. Notepad doesn't crash. You can mess with them all you like, and it's clean and human readable. This is important. Don't make an editor, because when we make roguelikes, sometimes they're passion projects, they're side projects, and you're like, oh man, you know what? I need an editor for these cool levels. You spend a month making it, and then, oh crap, it's finals. Or, oh, I have to go back to the moisture farm to harvest, and you're out of time, right? You're out of time. And so you can really lose the plot when you say, I'm gonna make an editor. You don't need one, maybe. Anyway, don't make an editor. I'm gonna show you the generation for meat and potatoes dungeons, the standard dungeons of Dungeonmans. Really simply here, there are text file-based shapes, that are placed together through a dungeon. And what you can see, the yellow bounded areas are handcrafted cards. Think of them like cards from a deck. The blue areas are generated procedurally in that they're just rooms and hallways. The ones off in the distance in the darkness are behind secret doors. And so those are usually like gateways to something terrible or a hidden chest or something like that. But everything else, the yellow boxes, are individual handcrafted areas. So the one in the center there, I actually like, the one with all the doors in it. You usually think about a dungeon and its myriad doors as each one being its own room. But in this case, they're all linked, and the monsters can hear through the doors. And it creates an excitement when you think, oh, I'll kick this door down, and I'm in here, I see these two guys, and then you're fighting and you hear doors opening. Like, why are the doors opening? And then, oh yeah, all the punks in the bottom are rushing up to go kick you in the butt. And that's cool, right? That's cool. Players dig that. Even if they bitch about it when they die, they still like it. They keep coming back. So that works. What we do to put this together and is, hold on, I brought this fancy thing up here for one thing, which is to remember a man's name. Hang on. Is there any chance that Mike Anderson's in the room? No. Okay. Mike Anderson put an article together on Rogue Basin that had area generation stuff that I used back in like 1986, and I've modified it a little bit, but it's his stuff, and I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. What we do is we take a room, like that first room, every tile around the edge, you just mix them up and put them in a bag, and you pull one out. Say, okay, this tile gets to have a door. Great. Then you get your stack of cards with different rooms on them, pull one out of that, and put it next to it in some fashion and say, does it fit? If it fits, sweet, do it over. Get all the edge tiles, put those in the bag. Keep doing this until you've gone deep enough, until you run out of memory, I don't know, whatever your conditions are that make this happen. If it doesn't fit, if you have a room that is placed next to a door and it overlaps something, then you throw it out and you try again. And if that doesn't fit, it doesn't work. And the example is I couldn't fit that on the slide. So that is the condition in which you do not generate a room. We do this and do this and do this, and that's how we make these meat and potato dungeons. It's helpful to mark depth from the center too, if you want to make sure how far you are from the beginning. I put the most treasure when I'm farthest away, or the stairs down when I'm farthest away. You can do that. What else? Graveyards in Dungeonmans, entirely procedural. The graveyard is a kind of barren open area full of graves, yards, trees, fences, and if you look at the bottom, that's the map view. The big squares on the left-hand side are fences around trees, which provide a sort of pseudo cover because the fences are half height, the trees fully block line of sight. And then the open areas are usually places where there is stone on the ground. And in a graveyard, when you're walking on the stone, you don't summon zombies. When you're on the grass, your walking may summon zombies. So you want to kind of get off the grass to the stone. But the stone has the tough monsters, so there's a choice to be made there. It's all procedural. And, you know, I can't say that it necessarily came out to be my favorite map, but the idea behind it is still you're wandering. You know, a graveyard is just this big open place. There's graves everywhere. I mean, there's no necessarily a guiding light. I mean, if there's a chapel in the middle or something, cool. But usually, they're wide open spaces and you're kind of poking around to see what's there. Crypts are another dungeon style. This is different. They're underground. And they have the same sort of cards from Meat and Potatoes dungeons, but they're all limited to 7x7. And they have wacky edges that can be entirely open. So if you look at the center, there's a little cross part in the center of the map, and above it, there's a big open space. Those are a number of tiles pressed together that just don't have edges on the walls. So there is no one tile that's as big as that space. It just so happened they laid out that way. So I want to give the player a tight catacomby feel with the occasional breath of open air, and then it's back to the catacombs, and the monsters and the crypts are like, oh, these big-ass hulking mummies and these slimes, and they can soak all the damage. They're coming at you and like, well, hey, didn't you just say conga line? Well, I know, but you're in a catacomb here, and they are tight spaces. You're supposed to be scared of all the skulls everywhere, and giant monsters that come down the line and clean it up are part of the feel. The way these are built, the crypt areas, again, text files. I don't use an editor. And the text files have very simple information. North, east, south, west flag saying, well, what openings does this crypt block have that are accessible? And then the data itself is, I don't know, wall, statues, doors, whatever the hell you want to put in there, periods for the ground, and so on. What we do here is we just say, okay, find an area that's empty. Say, well, what connects to it? Like, okay, well, this is a card with a north exit. Find another card that's got at least one south exit. Put it together. Did it work? Great. If not, well, okay, draw another card. And you do this and you do this, and then it has to match your conditions. You say, well, okay, it needs to be at least 10 rooms deep, or it can't be too big because that's boring. I mean, you fiddle with this, but it's very easy to iterate. Now, that's really important. The text file thing is important because you can iterate so easily, and it's even better if you hotload the data, right? If you mess with the text file, and you can load it right in the game without even having to recompile. That's beautiful. If your combat styles involves lots of jumping, dashing, or taking cover, or shooting over things, it's really great to be able to futz with this live, and that's why text files are awesome. I should point out that you should not make an editor. Again, text data, best data, except Dungeonmans had 2 editors. So what was that all about? Well, the first time I used a tool that a friend said, hey, this tool is an ASCII editor. Why use Notepad? This one can do like all the characters in multiple different colors and, you know, weird white space. It's like gray. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. I'll give it a try. And it's cool. I had mouse support and I could draw boxes and whatnot. I felt like it was getting in the way. Even though some of the bigger handcrafted areas were 40 by 40, that's a little much for a text file. I still felt more comfortable editing text myself. The second editor I built over Christmas break. It just said don't do, but I needed something to build really large set-piece dungeons. So there was the Mountain Fortress in Dungeonmans is actually like 7 different floors of interconnected outside, inside, caves, bridges, barracks, and stuff like that. I needed something where I could use the mouse, paint stuff live in-game, put down monsters live in-game. It was a necessity. Don't make an editor unless you have to. But you probably don't have to until you're so confident in your game and so far down the road that you say, okay, here's these specific cases where I need a very specific editor. You can get it done quickly and you don't lose the plot. That's all very important. So we want to make sure to fit the areas to our combat style, not the other way around. Right? Yeah? Okay. So really, there's 3 like core styles of combat. Your bump combat is melee, and that's the example on the left. That, okay, you know, the player is the little archer lady on the left, and she kicked the door down, and oh, what the hell, there's like a million orcs in here. That's amazing. And what, there's like 3 tigers. No, that's 1 tiger stacked 3 high. Oh, man. We want to give the player, or the monsters, the opportunity to flank you. It's conga line of death, kind of sucks. So we want to open these areas up and say, well, right here, there's 4 methods of egress. Well, the 2 methods of egress for the monsters out of that room. I guess one is also over the player's face. But then there's other methods where things can come in from the back. You don't want the player always feeling like they're taking it in the backside, but the dungeon is dangerous. Careful, cautious, on guard. You want to make sure you don't feel too comfortable leaving empty space behind you. Ranged combat, Dumarel, a fine example of anything roguelike. And there's lots of stuff here where you do have these long hallways, doors you can get between, covers you can hide, or corners you can hide behind. And there's plenty of science in the game for corner shooting, right? It's built into it. So these shapes are very useful for ranged combat. And then another one for spells or explosions, you know, rocket launcher combat or hurling giant boulders, those sort of things. You want to build areas that give you little tiny paces to stay out of line of sight and then run when the big explosions happen. So for those things, open areas are very useful. Okay, what do the areas you make encourage? I mean, there's shapes on the top right is the forest map that is generated entirely procedurally. The bottom left is the dungeon I showed you earlier. The red circle area, the red squared area in the middle is a really complex series of like ins, outs, doors, you know, double back switches, flanking maneuvers. Where the top red square, or red rectangle, is one of those hallways. They definitely create different styles of play. So you can make exploration, you can encourage caution, you can encourage courage among your players, you can have panic when they're in a place where there's too many doors and too many monsters. You can also have them tell cool stories. So why does this matter? I told you we'd get back to motivation. I mean, already 3 people have gotten them walked out of here during this, right? Why does this matter? There's no, well, I'm kidding, man, relax, I got to pee too. It's one of those things where you say, well, you know, I mean, why is this important? Like, this is just polish for fancy games, right? I don't know. I mean, like, real roguelikes, according to, you know, the Berlin interpretation, maybe not. This is procedural stuff. That's, you know, I'm not a designer. I'm a programmer. I do this as a hobby. I don't have time for this. And honestly, a true roguelike player doesn't notice these things. There's 4 excuses. I mean, we got 10 more at least, right? Is this necessary? Those are the things we say. That's what they say. I am fucking tired of that. I read that too much. Indie roguelikes are a dime a dozen. I mean, sucks for me because I'm trying to sell one, sure. But if you're working on one for research, let's say you're writing a paper and you want to use roguelikes as a core of that, well, what does that say about your work? If people say, oh no, another indie roguelike, it doesn't matter, right? Well, we have to do better. I think that most of us know this already, but it's something we should pick up as a cause. We have to make sure that things we create don't fall into the same trap. They don't just become rooms and hallways. No matter how big your bears are or how many spleens they have, it's important to make sure that the things the player do, the things players do, always are guided in some way by your own hands. So if it's the way the player gets powers and they execute them, great. If it's the shape of the room, if it's hallways versus combat arenas, if it's handcrafted stuff that says, what the hell died here? I'm walking around in the bones of a giant dinosaur. All these things we can do, procedural, emergent, or handcrafted. And I think we have to keep that in mind as we continue to build more awesome games. I'm done. All right, there we go. So, thank you. So those of you who stuck around, you want a free copy, email me and I'll give you one. You send me some feedback. That sucked is acceptable, but I expect you to be a little more creative. You can also say, hey, I'm working on something and this was interesting, or hey, you're wrong. That's cool too. I don't care. Just if anything made you feel like, as we're talking about, drop me a line. Happy to answer questions if we have time. You, sir. The question was, why are you so bad at game making? And can you answer that for me? So the sarcastic reply is, well, I actually have sold the game to people and they enjoy it. Right, I mean, you're like, well, I did too. Like, okay, fine. Well, the reality is, it didn't take an entire Christmas break. It took about 3.5 days sitting in Pat's basement with me and Andrew and Jeremy and Pat and the cats. And, we were working on cool stuff, and the editor, well, okay, working on the editor, but this power crashes again, I'll fix that. Oh, and this thing here, and I'm kind of the only programmer in the group. And then, well, all right, so we're doing level design, and I'll get to fix this for him. And it's a thing, Sure. If you're by yourself, working alone, and you want to make a bad editor, take 3 days, no problem. But if you have a bigger project, I guess the point I'm really trying to make is, when we do things that aren't making the game, the temptation is there to lose the plot, to just sort of get lost in a rabbit hole. And that's why so many projects are sitting there in unfinished.bat. You click that and then just slowly rolls by everything you never accomplished, one after another. We have too many of those. I do, you do, we all do. Don't make an editor. Any other questions? So the commenters brought up 2 points. The first is that the creation of an editor does tie together the room. It ties together lots of different things about your engine and builds them into something more cohesive, which is something you may not want to do. Or am I getting that right, that it's something you want to... You're increasing the cost of changing things. It's not really a pure win. It seems like a pure win, but increases the cost of future changes, right? And then the other comment was that text files are the best. And I agree. But primarily because if you end up scrapping your engine because you're a roguelike programmer and we do that, you still have text files that are still made of text and they still work. And that is an awesome place to reuse data from one catastrophe to the next. Any other questions? Oh, hey. Yeah, the exact process I took myself. I should have mentioned it, but I figured I was going to run over, so I didn't. The comment was, if you're going to use text files, you could take something like Notepad++ or any of your editors and use a monospace font. Great, that makes you have an actual, sorry? Oh, make your own. Oh, I just grabbed one. Okay, yeah. Oh, sure, the monospace font that you create yourself has shapes and whatnot. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, like fontfrog.ru or something. I don't know. There's fonts everywhere, so you can't swing a dead cat and not grab one. But the idea of creating one yourself that matches the needs of your game is actually pretty cool. That's good. Question here. Yes, sir. Right. So a fine suggestion being, hey, bitmaps do the same thing. And it is easier on the eyes, too. You can open Photoshop or any paint program and you can create colored walls and whatnot. Sorry? Outstanding. So there's another idea, which is to use a layer-based program like Photoshop or PaintShop Pro that uses layers to use the bitmaps for area creation, but You've got the overworld and then the special landmarks on top of it, and other details. And so layer after layer can contain like, weather data and favorite spices, and you can build that on top of your world. And that is actually very useful, very cool. You had a question. Who asked that question?
Biggest of plays, of course.
Biggest of plays.
Yes.
He's afraid I'm going to make a game too complicated for him, which is the issue. He can barely get his head around Dungeonmans, and it makes him a little sad. No, he's a friend of mine, and yeah, sure, there will be further games down the road, but that's not quite relevant to this cool science talk. Yeah. So Sheridan points out, if you actually do your job correctly, you can make an editor that creates agnostic content, that it creates stuff, data that can be read by multiple games, and it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to something, and of course that's true. Of course that's true. I'll reiterate, I'm thinking of real-life situations I've seen where lots of friends have said, oh, I'm working on a thing, I got lost in a system, and then they stop making the game because life happens. And this is a case, this is a pitfall that you can fall into, and I think you don't necessarily need an editor. That's that. Was there a question anywhere else? I thought I saw a hand up there. Two more, come on. Bob.
I've already made it.
You should throw the editor away. The question was, I've already made an editor, what do I do? Yes, right. It's not too late to get tested. There's the infection may only go so far. All right, anything else? Cool. Thanks everyone so much, not only for just dealing with this, but also being here for the good talks and hanging out all day. I don't know, I've not been in the room with this many roguelike developers once ever, and the last IRDC was over far away across the ocean in enemy lands, right? So it's cool that we're doing this here in the States, and I don't know, very awesome. So thank you all very much.